So today is the day. Today, the day this goes live on January 7th at noon Central, I am going to be doing a co-stream over on Work to Game with the number 2 with Xandri, comparing the dungeons of World of Warcraft versus the dungeons of Final Fantasy. Real gameplay, real dungeons. We're really doing this. And huge thanks to all you that hang out over there, and big thanks to everybody hitting subscribe over here. It's absolutely mind-blowing to see how many of you are coming and hanging out, and the comments section is blowing up, and it's been delightful. So what is going on? Let's give some context to this, because I don't know how that discussion is going to go, and then we're going to follow it up with a discussion that will be posted to her private YouTube channel, and then my channel will get the dungeon gameplay here. So that'll be a thing that goes here, whatever that looks like. So I don't know. We're going to see. So dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV, we're just going to give some context of what this means in both games. I'm running the very first oldest dungeons in both games back to back. Next week we'll run the second dungeons, and then so on, and we need to do some math to see if that actually continues to line up. So it's Sastasha, which is like the easiest, most boring dungeon in the world in Final Fantasy, versus Ragefire Chasm, the easiest and most boring dungeon in the world. Like, they're going head to head here. That's what's happening. What happens? First, in World of Warcraft, she's going to queue as a tank, and I'm going to queue as a healer. In Final Fantasy, same thing. There are 4 tanks to choose from. I don't know which one she's bringing in Final Fantasy. There are 6 tanks to choose from in World of Warcraft, and we're going to be synced down in Final Fantasy to level 17, and in World of Warcraft, we're going to go in with World Sync, meaning at level 10 or greater, 10 to 50, we can actually go in, and the dungeon will appear whatever level we are. So I'm going to be healing on my Shaman, and I believe my Shaman's like level 11, and the world is going to look level 11 to me. She said, I think she was either going to come on like a level 9 Paladin she has that she'll have to get up to 11, because you got to be out of the first zone, which is 10, and then get to Croby time. It naturally accidentally gives you 11. Or she might be coming on like, I think like a 39 Death Knight she had. And either way, it doesn't really matter. The world will appeal her level to her. Her meters will show as if we're all doing damage appropriate to that level. My healing would be appropriate to that level. Health pools, all of it adjusts. There's problems with both systems in Final Fantasy. When you get synced down, I'm bringing in a level 46 White Mage. I will only have access to my level 17 abilities. That sucks. But we're all naturally 17, and I will be synced down to the top of the gear range, so I'll feel really good. In World of Warcraft, everything's synced to me, which means the only way to gauge my power is what is my gear doing relative to my current level. So it's this constant thing where you can be under-geared or over-geared, and it really causes things to get screwy when they try to balance things for like, well, what would a level 11 with level 13 gear on do to this content relative to a level 49 with level 47 gear on? Like, it gets weird, but you have access to your full set of skills. I will come in on the healers. How many healers are there in? So in Final Fantasy, there's 3 healers. I assume there will be 4 next expansion. And in World of Warcraft, we currently have, I got to do the math on this. We have Druid, Paladin, Monk, Priest, Shaman. 5? Is that right? 5? I think we have 5. So more, because there are plenty of classes in World of Warcraft and they all have specs, you end up with pretty much more of every option, like in each role slot, because it ends up being a huge number overall, because it's the initial number of classes times the number of specs they each have, which ranges from, I think, Demon Hunters, I think, only have 2, and then Druids, I think, are the only ones with 4. I think most everybody sits in between with 3, and that can range. You can have people who just have three DPS specs, like Hunters, Survival, Marksman, and Beastmaster, or you can have things like Paladin, where you have a melee damage spec, a plate-wearing healer, or a tank. And so, like, it gets really hard to compare both games in that way. And in World of Warcraft, the reason we're running healer and tank is because in both games, we're going to be queuing in. In World of Warcraft, we're going to be queuing in through Duty Finder, I think is what it's called, Dungeon Finder. And in Final Fantasy, we're going to be queuing in Party Finder. In World of Warcraft, if we were looking to pick up viewers and we weren't going to just hop in random or hop in with friends, we would use Group Finder. And in Final Fantasy, we would use Party Finder. Both have systems. In Final Fantasy, we would only be able to pull from people that are on our same data center. There are 3 data centers across North America, 2 data centers across EU, and then I don't know what happens from there. I think, yeah, those are the 2 sets of servers I pay attention to. In World of Warcraft, there's 1 set of North American servers, 1 set of EU servers, and you can play with anybody across them. So it's no big deal. The restriction there is that there are factions in in World of Warcraft. So you do have to be Horde North American to play with us versus Alliance. And in Final Fantasy, you don't really do that. There is like something kind of, the original expansion had these 3 grand companies, and there were some differences like when it came to PvP, which you could do, but they've since lifted a lot of that. Basically, it was like covenants, except that like imagine years later, your covenant decision is still like impacting who you can do certain content. Like, doesn't matter. So we're going to go into these dungeons. The dungeons are going to have basically roughly the same number of bosses. There's going to be trash in between because it's the early dungeons. None of it's really going to matter. Mechanics aren't going to matter. It's all going to be the same. And as we go up, it will slowly start to matter more and more. Both dungeons were originally released into the game to be run at very low level and have very limited access to skills, and that's it. But like over the years, because we're talking about something from A Realm Reborn and something from Classic, they're very old. Some of the Classic dungeons got redone in Cataclysm, so it's currently grouped with Cataclysm in Chromie time, which is how they group things in timelines to guarantee that sets of people have opted into that leveling content. That's a whole nother process that 14 just doesn't really do anything like. And they're both going to drop gear. When they drop gear, there's going to be something odd kind of happening. In Final Fantasy, it is going to drop level 17 loot. Doesn't even matter if you run on a level 50, it's going to drop loot. That loot has fixed eye levels, it's a fixed loot table, and that loot, as a general rule from dungeons, is not tradable on the marketplace. You can desynthesize it down into basically, where it breaks it down, it kind of disenchants it into a crafting material that you use no matter what you're crafting, this crystal type thing. There's different tiers of it, so it's kind of just garbage. And then this other crafting mat, so it'll craft it into like a single iron ingot or something that is appropriate to that piece of gear, as if that gear had been crafted. So if it's a plate piece of gear, might drop a metal bar. If it's a cloth piece of gear, might drop a piece of cloth, and so on. In World of Warcraft, it's going to drop a piece scaled to my level, up to the cap of what that dungeon can hit. So most dungeons now with this new stuff, I assume, are going to be capped at 50. So I'll be able to find up to level 50 versions of anything. It'll drop based on my level. It's tradable to other people in the party, and I don't know what happens if I trade, if I'm like 11 and you're 46 and I trade, because I've never done it. And so you can trade it to them for like up to 2 hours. And then boss drops will be bind on pickup, and they'll become untradeable, and they can only really be vendored or broken down by enchanters specifically. Each character picks one of 2 professions, and if they have enchanting as a profession, they can break it down. Otherwise, there's only really so much you can do with it. So it mostly just gets vendored. And then anything that drops from like trash or anything like that, some boss drops are bind on equip. They can be traded on the auction house, so it generates this constant source of gear. It's most commonly used at that point for the cosmetic market, which is called Transmogrify in World of Warcraft and Glamour in Final Fantasy. And the Transmogrify has a menu that encourages you to collect like literally every appearance that's ever happened, as opposed to the Glamour system, which has a limited number of slots because they have to track things like dye and all of that. And so it's just a more complex system, and so therefore it's more cumbersome in its interface, but it gets more powerful in the end result. I wish it had a menu like Transmogrify, but I also wish that Transmog had the variety of items that you could have. I mean, you could be in like a full-blown suit in Final Fantasy, and like you're really limited on how far you can take your warrior, or how far you can take your monk or something like that. I mean, there's some decent stuff, and you can always hide the slots that look too much like armor, like shoulder pads, but it's just not as powerful. And so there is always kind of a little bit of a market for it. Depends on how rare the item is and how much of a pain it is to run the dungeon. So Ragefire Chasm, it's in Orgrimmar. It's quick to get to. On a high level, you can run it in basically what Final Fantasy would call unsynced, where you go in on a level 60. Everything can get pulled in once. Everything dies in one hit. It takes like 4 minutes a lap. You can run a dungeon up to 10 times in a single hour before they say, hey, knock it off. And the instance servers need to chill. And then you got to wait till the beginning of the next hour, and you can run it another 10 times. So those items really don't generate any value, because anybody could do it at any time, and and they're not then it's not that big of a loot table. It's got like 8 drops in it because it was intended to be run a couple of times from like level 4 to 8 or something like that. It wasn't ever meant to be a thing. It's got a couple of quests in there. The dungeon quests take place inside the dungeon, and because of the new syncing system, like when I zoned into Wintergrass the other day, I picked it up, and when Wintergrass ended, they actually allowed me to complete it from within my log, like without going back there, which was great. So we're going to go run that dungeon. And then afterwards, we're going to run the dungeon in the other game. So we're going to start with Final Fantasy, move to World of Warcraft, and we're just going to do both. Both dungeons should take about 15 minutes. They really are faster. They really aren't that big of a deal. And if you die in either dungeon, your group just kind of runs back to the beginning. Resurrections are something that's a little bit different in both games in combat. Not really going to be an issue in these dungeons, so maybe something we get to talk about more. But basically, World of Warcraft has a limited number of battle resurrections that can be done. Only certain classes have access to it. If combat ends, all healers pretty much get access to like a mass res. So if everybody wipes, they can just kind of bring everybody up. And there's not really the ability to res people in combat, so deaths are kind of taken seriously. But on Final Fantasy, the reason deaths are taken seriously is that a resurrection costs an enormous amount of mana as a general rule. The red mage is a little weird, but like, and typically it's going to be your healers and your casters that all have access to it. Anybody can do it at any time, but when you come back up, you get 1 minute of weakness, and your stats are all reduced and all that. And so like, and you come up with no mana. So if you res like a caster, their DPS is just all sorts of screwed up. And so like what ends up keeping you honest, because you don't technically have a limit of battle reses, what keeps you honest is that in harder content, there's going to be a DPS check or a healer check. And when your healers are busy casting these long casts, or even if they swift cast it where they instant cast it, they burn a cooldown to instant cast it, it's still like the uptime of a DPS kills you, because most content, when we get into higher end content, is run as 8-mans. And so like losing somebody and then giving up one of your 2 healers for a certain amount of time and a little bit of their mana, like it just ripples, and you're fine for a second, and you're fine. And then you go, man, it feels like we're getting behind. You are. So, you know, as opposed to World of Warcraft where people run in like 25-mans, and so losing one person, yes, it's a bigger penalty for that one person, but the whole raid, one person dropping in a lot of content, depending on how tightly it's tuned and how well they're geared for it, they can probably just absorb that for a time, and then they can come back from it. It's that second, that third, that fourth death where it starts to kind of ripple, where it adds up kind of ratio-wise to losing that one person, and, you know, because you're losing 1/8 of your raid at that point. And so it starts to kind of, when you lose that second, third, fourth, you'll see people say, you know what, we're either doing this for prog, we're doing this to kind of understand mechanics and practice, but there's a pretty good chance in really high-end super progression content that, like, if you're only going for a clear, you should just wipe it up. So other than that, dungeon content's really, really straightforward. The low-level dungeons are going to be super boring. Next week, you know, assuming everybody likes this, we'll run the second dungeon from both. And that'll add just a tiny bit, like the tiniest bit of extra mechanics. Both games will just say, you know what? And this is old. This was the old way of teaching dungeons. And it'll say, you know what? We'll just add a little bit to it. Bosses might have a little bit of mechanics. If they hit you, they kind of hurt, but no big deal. You'll be fine. And dungeon design has changed over the years. The way WoW has made sure that they all kind of feel alike is that if a dungeon had like 1 million bosses, in the new thing, you still only have to kill 3, I think is how they typically do it. So you kind of kill like, usually like the first and the second boss because they're right next to each other, and then you kind of just run to the last boss and you're done, or whatever it is. Depends on the dungeon, but like they've kind of streamlined it so that some of the convoluted old dungeons like BRD or even like Wailing Caverns, like you can just get lost in there otherwise. And like you could be like, well, you know, you'll run it with somebody who knows their way. Okay, even if somebody did know their way, they haven't done it in 10 years. So like it's just easier to like, they've cleaned a lot of it up, dungeon maps and all that. It all works way better than it did. So they've kind of brought it up to speed, which is good because otherwise those dungeons would be older. Remember, Final Fantasy only allows us to go back to 2.0. 1.0 got deleted with an in-game event that allowed like things to crash down on the world and the whole world to explode because they were like, we are so sorry. We don't ever want anybody to see this content again. Thank you to all those who are playing. And if you play in 1.0 and you keep playing 2.0 and behind, you'll actually get a discount off your subscription. We are so sorry. If you want to know the history of that, go watch the No Clip documentary right here on YouTube about Final Fantasy XIV. It has a part 1, 2, 3. Part 1 is just over like the what went wrong with 1.0. What a mess. I think it's like 50 minutes, an hour. It's nothing. Just enjoy it. So that's really it. That's kind of dungeon content compared in a nutshell. Short 4-man versus 5-man. There's some other stuff going on in Final Fantasy. You have a limit break where like your party's building up a bar and that can be used, and depending on who uses it, it does different things. The global cooldown at low level is going to be heartbreaking to any of you WoW people that watch this. It's 2.5 seconds. You have off the global cooldown abilities, which kind of add to that. So the time you're at level cap, there's lots going on. There's all sorts of stuff going on. Actions per minute, right back up there. All sorts of stuff going on in the fights. Feels great. Feels honestly the same as when I go do a Mythic Plus run. They feel every bit as frantic when I'm doing something, as long as the content is of the same difficulty relative to where I'm geared and all of that. They feel very similar. But at super low level, you have 2.5-second cooldowns, and you have the same number of bars, abilities on the bar that you would in WoW. You have that kind of, oh, your combo's 1, 2, 3. It's okay. Maybe you've never played a video game before, which is great. But like if you have, it hurts. And that's why people don't like getting scaled down. And so you only have a handful of abilities on the bar. You have the world's longest global cooldown because it gets shorter later, and you don't have off the globals. And over the years, they've continued to add abilities, which is a problem that WoW is familiar with. They've recently come up with what they believe to be the solution of all solutions. It's going to be amazing. It'll never be a problem again, and we'll see. But with Final Fantasy, that really hasn't happened. And so over the years, as we've gotten to the point where it's like, what, you don't have room for 72 buttons on the bar? They pruned it down, and they pruned down old abilities they feel are underused. Well, what happens to somebody that's new to the game and leveling? What happens if they come across a point where the way it felt good was because this is ability that got pruned because of something that it meant to in-game? The in-game people didn't notice. They're like, yeah, you know what? I wasn't really using it anymore. Yeah, but I was about to. Like, I don't have the thing you got. And so it's just gone. And so the low-level content has not aged. It is not even as intense, I guess, for lack of a better word, as it was at the time. And so it's going to be slow if you're a WoW player and you're watching this and you're like, what? So you guys just kind of like do it? Yeah, we just kind of do it. So you can't really go any faster. Usually to keep people from like quad pulling things, there's like hard locks, there's a door, there's a wall, there's something where you gotta like get a key. So there's things that you can only pull so fast. You'll only have so many abilities on the bar. So even if you can pull big, just know your healer only has like, depending on the class, they have like 1 or 2 heals, and that's what they got. Like there isn't any like, oh my god, it's going poorly buttons. Like you get what you get. And so it never really feels like in that like silly god mode that when I go into WoW and I have heirloom gear equipped, that little Aetheryte earring you Final Fantasy players get grants you extra experience, and like it's fine stats, I guess, and then you have a ring down at that level. Yeah, that's cool. What if you had like a whole set that gave you like bonuses and gear, and it included like your weapon and like all your left side pieces, and like you were just like super beefy, and you were always basically equipped in like the best of dungeon gear with like a decent chunk of your, I think it's like 6 or 7 of your slots or something. Like you wreck things at low level. Heirloom is god mode, and they're just there isn't anything like that in 14. I don't know if there should be, but there isn't. You have multiple characters in WoW, and the way they get around that is they're all count bound, as opposed to Final Fantasy, where like you wouldn't need a count bound for that because all your alts are on one character, so you just kind of switch. So I think that's like a general overlay of everything you'd need to know to watch the stream tomorrow and understand like at a super, super, super basic level what is happening in, and I say tomorrow, today, whatever the time is weird, I'm recording this in the past. And so like whatever that is. So enjoy that, and I'm going to have a lot of fun with it. And then I guess I'll spoil it in this afternoon's post after the stream. I'll spoil what the next collaborative event is, because we're going to be seeing stuff with Xandri. We're going to be going through dungeons, content, comparing WoW to 14, all of that awesomeness. We're going to be doing that on a grander scale, ideally every Thursday at noon until like, I don't know. My plans right now really kind of like get fuzzy after February 5th with the Final Fantasy 14 showcase. After that, like I really don't know how to plan for anything. Podcast is coming back online. So that is a thing. And so we're starting with just one guest a month, and then we'll kind of see what that does now that Brian's had a baby. Go over and congratulate him on Ginger Prime, and subscribe there while you're at it. And then, yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, I can't announce anything else yet. We're gonna just hype things up. Picking up steam here, guys. We're picking up steam. It's gonna be more and more and more. You guys have overwhelmed me with your support, and we're just gonna keep leveling this up. Called the electrician today, and he's gonna come out Sunday and help me kind of sort out this stuff with like, I've got too many electronics plugged in because it turns out streaming uses a lot of electricity, and yeah, we're gonna see what our options are with the other bedroom. Ordered a new mic stand so that this thing's not floor mounted, so that maybe You can avoid hearing the keyboard as much because right now it's closer to the keyboard than my face. We got one that's going to be desk mounted because we're fancy now. And actually I ordered that as an anticipatory reward because it looks like gaming kinda is going to be monetized. So if YouTube's not showing ads against my content already, they will be, and that will help support the stream. So that and the content and all that. So thank you guys to those of you that watch without ad block. That'll come in whatever the world does with shipping these days. And so when that shows up, we'll level that up, and we're just going to keep on charging forward. This is all, we're just going to level it up and just keep. How can we do more? How can we make more content? How can we enjoy more? If you guys have any questions, if you have any topics, keep up the discussion down below. I am listening and reading everything I can, and I would love to just continue discussing other things about either of these games, about other games. You know, I don't just play these two, so like these are the two that like I know the most and the longest, so it's easiest for me to kind of start here on something like I really know well. But I would be perfectly capable going and getting like a casual level of knowledge and an introduction into another game, or going and getting a refresher in a game that maybe I've kind of dipped my toe in before. I've been playing Destiny Beyond Light. I'm super interested in what's going on with Guild Wars. I'm super interested in what's going on with ESO. I sit in streams of it. I have no idea what I'm watching. I played ESO on launch. I played Guild Wars 1. There's a ton of new stuff coming online. I'm intrigued. So like, let me know. Let's keep hanging out in stream and in the comments, and we'll see where that goes. As long as it just stays related to gaming, kinda. See ya.